The slush was the color of old tea layered on the curb where the plows had given up. You could smell metal and winter, street grates breathing out a tired kind of steam. I saw her before I heard her, an older woman in a coat too thin for the hour, gloves off, knuckles pink and raw, staring down into a storm drain as if it had made a promise and broken it. "It slipped," she said when she noticed me, breath leaving in white ribbons. "Right there. It was in my pocket, and I don't know why it was in my pocket." You can tell a lot from the way someone says pocket. I crouched without thinking. My father had taught me to look for what light does when it hits the places we forget to clean. "Check the drain," he always said when clouds stacked up and gutters sang. He'd kept a tiny hook in a coffee tin in the closet with screws and washers, and a folded napkin that once said, "Thank you for your service," and meant it. When he died, the tin came to me. The hook started living in my backpack the way certain habits move in after grief and never pay rent. I slid the hook between grate and edge, the slush soaking my sleeve, the cold crawling up my wrist like it had been waiting for this exact skin. She stood bent beside me, hands twisting as if she could wring a ring back into being, with worry alone. "I need a magnet," I murmured, half to myself. I keep one the size of a coin for days when machines tell you they're more stubborn than broken. It clinked against the hook with a small, hopeful sound. I ran it slow along the lip. Slush, grit, a bottle cap, and then a wink. Just a pale flicker that could have been a lie or one of those tricks light plays when your heart already wants to believe. I tried again, slower this time. The wink became a whisper of circle, then a wait. I caught my breath. "Got you," I told the thing that couldn't hear me, and drew the line up, inch by cold inch. The ring broke the surface, covered in winter. I set it in my palm and wiped it gently with the corner of my sleeve. It was nothing expensive, not the kind of metal that knows banks, but it was thick with years, engraving inside, edges softened by time. She took it like it might run, looked at me like she hadn't expected the world to say yes tonight. Then she folded in, small and sudden, and pressed her face into my coat the way people do when it is either that or the ground. "He didn't get to say sorry," she said into my zipper. The sentence landed in my chest and started walking around like it owned the place. We stood there until both our hands remembered they belonged to bodies that needed heat. I walked her to her building door a few houses down. She tried to pay me. I told her no. She tried to insist. I told her I had come with my hook because once my father had done the same for a pair of keys and a neighbor who cried the same cry. I told her I was glad there was light. "That's rare," she said, a half laugh that didn't quite stand up. "Someone being glad to be cold." I said, "Some things shouldn't sit in water," because it was easier than explaining. She nodded, like we were speaking the same language. At home, I put the backpack down on the chair by the door, and the chair made that little complaint it makes when it wants to be a different chair. I warmed my hands around a mug I didn't drink from. The ring's weight stayed with me like a memory my body had borrowed. I took out my phone, stared at the one number I haven't stopped knowing, let it ring. When the voicemail started, I hung up before the tone could tell me to talk. The sentence hit the walls again. He didn't get to say sorry. Before I take you further, tell me where you're watching from, and if there's a sentence you wish you'd said before the door closed. Drop it in the comments and follow for more stories like this one. My name is Raphael. I'm 35, and my apartment smells like boiled varnish when the radiators remember they're alive. I do winter work. Leaky pipes, stubborn radiators, sidewalk salt that likes to collect in the wrong corners. In summer, I switch to screens and paint and whatever the building asks. It's honest work. It's the kind that leaves your hands speaking a language the rest of you has to learn. I have a brother, Lucas. We haven't spoken in 3 years, unless you count the words you throw like 2 heavy tools at a person who used to help you lift. The last time we stood close enough to smell each other's anger, our father lay in a room that forgot him as soon as we walked out. I missed a call that day. His call. My father's name dancing on my screen when I was under a sink with a wrench and a thought about how soap builds a city under your house without anyone funding it. I wiped my hands. I reached too slow. The call went to voicemail. I said I'd call him back from the bus. The bus took 30 minutes to be my bus, and by then a neighbor had found him and the world already had its story ready. Lucas has always believed that if I had answered, the end of our father's life would have been different. I have always believed that if he had gone to see Dad more often, maybe the beginning of the end would have looked less like loneliness. We laid those beliefs on the same table at the funeral home and walked away with nothing but our own half of a broken plate. He took the half with, "You missed the call," written on it. I took, "You came late." Neither shard is useful, but both cut fine. Our father left us things that matter and things that don't. The watch with the face that reflects back your own doubt, the coffee tin, the phrase, "check the drain," that came out of his mouth whenever weather gathered and life tried to go somewhere it didn't belong. He didn't leave a letter. He left a list. Trash day. Clean the lynch trap. Candles in the drawer next to the stove. Call your brother. The night the ring came back, I sat at the table with the coffee tin and my phone and the wrong kind of quiet. The woman's sentence wouldn't let me be. He didn't get to say sorry. My father had called. I didn't answer. If Lucas had written a script for my grief, it couldn't have been crueler. I stared at the hook and the magnet and felt like a man who had pulled the wrong thing out of the wrong drain. The thing about drains is that they aren't just holes where things go. They are promises. Make way. Carry the mess. Take it somewhere it belongs. But sometimes they swallow what you can't afford to lose. Your job isn't to yell at the hole. Your job is to take out the hook and bring something back. That's what I told myself. And if I'm that man, if I'm the man who will fish a ring out of snow for a stranger, why can't I be the man who calls his brother without waiting for the right occasion? Why can't I take out my hook for something less visible and more stubborn? I set my father's watch on the table. It had stopped at 2:17 the day of the funeral, and I never replaced the battery because it felt like an insult to give it time. I told myself I'd bring it to the watchmaker when I had a reason. That reasoning had become a habit. I put the watch in my coat pocket like a dare. I typed Lucas's name into a message. "Your name is still first," I wrote, then deleted it, because you don't start there. I wrote, "I found a ring in the snow." Deleted. "Can we talk?" Deleted. I set the phone face down and went to bed, and dreamt about a grate and a boy turning away from a ringing phone because the sink needed him more. In the morning I went back to the corner where the ring had had its winter. Habit is a form of prayer for men who don't know what else to do. The grate looked the same as it always had. There was a line of salt, like a careless necklace on the curb. I nudged the grate with my boot, the way a person pats a shoulder to say, "We're good." "Raphael?" I turned. It was her, the woman from the night before, smaller in daylight, but steadier. She had a paper bag in one hand and 2 cups in the other. The smell that comes from the kind of coffee that doesn't ask you to add anything wafted up. "Helena," she said, tipping her chin to make the word her introduction. "Hi," I said, because sometimes the mouth forgets the most basic work. "How's the—" She touched the spot on her chest where a chain would sit. "Safe, thank you." The bag had rolls, and the coffee was stronger than I thought my nerves would visit at this hour. We stood on the corner like 2 actors nobody had told were supposed to be in the same scene. "Come up," she said, eventually. "I want to show you something." Her apartment was on the second floor of a building that remembers who built it. The stairs had that soft center old wood gets in winter. The first thing I noticed was a line of frames on a shelf, photos in black and white, some in color, none arranged for show. The second was the smell of lemon oil and the kind of dust that isn't neglect, just living. "I made you go cold last night," she said, pulling out a chair at the kitchen table. "Let me do something warmer." We sat. The table had scratches exactly where a person's elbow might land if they're telling the right story. She set the ring on the wood and spun it with one finger so it made a small orbit. "We fought," she said plainly, eyes on the circle, "about a picture that hung crooked and a faucet that wouldn't stop lying about being fixed. I told him to call someone who would show up and make it right. He said he had already called our son, and he'd come on Saturday. I said Saturday was 3 days from now, and I didn't want to hear the drip for that long. He put the picture straight, the faucet kept talking. He went for a walk. A neighbor found him a block away. His heart had already told him no. I didn't get to put the word sorry back where it belongs. Neither did he." She held the ring in her palm. Her hand was shaking in a small way salt shakers do when kitchens are quiet. "I guess I've been carrying this around, to add weight back to a thing that got too light." I looked at the ring and saw a conversation with a drain, not a jewel. The thing about weight is that we all assign it ourselves. A ring is just metal until it remembers a finger. A finger is just a piece of you until someone else holds it, and you both decide to make promises you don't know how to keep yet, but want to. "I'm sorry," I said, knowing how inadequate it is and knowing there's nothing else that fits a moment like this better. "Me too," she said. She took a sip of coffee and put her other hand on mine, without asking if it was okay. It was.
"And thank you." She didn't ask me for a story. I told her one anyway, because the room felt like a place where truth had practice. I told her about my father and the last call, and the fight with Lucas that unfolded on a day that had no business hosting a fight. I told her about the watch in my coat that pretended to be a pocket warmer, and the hook in my backpack that my hands know better than my head. "You'll call him," she said, not so much a command as a weather report. "I tried last night," I confessed. I forgot how to speak." "Would you like help?" She stood before I could answer and shuffled toward the living room. From a drawer in a small cabinet under the television, she pulled a shoebox, covered in paper with tiny blue flowers. "He's not in here," she said with a half smile, tapping the lid. "But something is." Inside were letters and a flash drive. She set the drive into a small player already plugged into the TV. The screen showed a church basement in a wide shot, men in suits that meant 1970 or 1981. A bride who could have been a photograph of this woman if you tilted it right. The groom knocked his elbow into a microphone that squealed, and everyone laughed like the change in sound had been planned. He started to speak. He said the wrong thing first. Then he said, "Sorry." And everyone cheered because the ceremony had not begun yet, and already the marriage was teaching them how to be a little more human than they had been when they walked in. "He knew how," Helena said softly, pressing pause. "He just ran out of road." She led me into the bathroom on the way back to the door and pointed at the faucet that had been lying. The drip was tiny but relentless. Plink, plink, plink. It sounded like a clock pretending to be a river. "It's nothing," she said. "It's everything." It's strange how your body eats shame and courage at the same table. I took out a small wrench, because, of course, I had one in my pocket, and a new washer, because, of course.
I tightened the seat gently. The drip stuttered and then made up its mind to stop talking. She put her palm under the spout like someone testing rain. I looked at her, and at the ring, and at the drain, and thought about everything we let go that would rather stay. "Come by the community center on Thursday," she said as she opened the door. "We have a silly little thing called Found Night. People bring lost things and make a proper ending for them. We let each other clap for solutions." "Sounds dangerous," I said, smiling despite myself. "It is," she said. "You might end up saying the thing you should have said last winter." I walked down the stairs with the watch heavier in my pocket than it had been an hour before. The community center is the kind of place that carries every sign anyone has tried to convince it to hold. Bake sale flyers pinned over yoga schedules, over a lost and found board with a child's mitten hanging from a clothespin. A room off the main hall had a circle of chairs and a table with coffee that could almost tell you it wasn't as old as it tasted. Found Night had more light than chairs. It also had slower breathing than grief. A man walked up with a bicycle lock key and a sigh. A teenage girl held a book that had a name inside the front cover and a phone number with no area code, which meant old. A woman unfurled a scarf, told the weather around it, and then laughed into her own palms like she had managed to joke with a ghost.
"They let me be a witness. That is what you call a man who doesn't know which chair is his yet." When it was Helena's turn, she stood at the front with her ring on a chain around her neck as if to show the room where to look for the moral. "He didn't get to say sorry," she said evenly, and the room made that sound rooms make when men allow themselves to understand something without interrupting it with words. "This is me learning how to say it for both of us." A man with hair the color of cigarettes pointed at a photograph pinned to the corkboard. "I lost my ring in '79, he said, "on the first day the snow melted. Found it in the gutter in May like it had taken a beach vacation and was ready to do the dishes." The room chuckled. He sat back down. "Metal remembers the way home," he added. I tucked that sentence into the same place I keep my father's "check the drain." You never know when you're going to need to reach for one or the other. I stood up, not because I knew what to say, but because my legs were suddenly less interested in sitting. "My father called me," I said. I didn't answer. I've been pinning that sentence to my chest ever since. A woman across the room put a hand over her heart as if we'd both been feeling the same ache at the same time. "My brother said if I had answered, things would have been different. He might be right, but he might just be hurting. I'm scared to call him because if he doesn't answer, I don't know what excuse I'll switch to." Helena stepped toward me with nothing in her hands but time. "Call from the hallway," she said. "Make it so you can pace without wearing out your carpet." The hall had the kind of linoleum that remembers every shoe that's ever crossed it. I stared at my phone until the skin of my thumb forgot its own fingerprint. I dialed. It rang. Lucas answered with a hard "hello" that sounded like someone bracing for a blow. "Hey," I said, and the word came out younger than my body. "It's me. Rafa." His voice is the one I grew up beside. On other days, it has made jokes. On this one, it sounded like he'd smoked the idea of me and was regretting it. "What do you want?" "To apologize," I said. "There is no way to make that sentence pretty. You just say it. I missed Dad's call. I'm sorry. I punished you for what hurt me because that was easier than looking at the part that was my fault." Silence. I thought the phone had dropped until I heard him breathe through his nose the way a sometimes sick person breathes before an asthma whistle. "Yeah," he said. "I was ugly. You weren't wrong about that." I found a ring in the snow," I said, because apparently my brain thinks it's polite to change the subject to the theme. "Raphael," he said, and there was the barest outline of a laugh inside my name. "You calling to make me cry?" "I'm calling to stop carrying what we should be carrying together. Can I come over?" He didn't answer yes. He didn't say no. He said, "Bring the hook. The gutter won't stop coughing." Lucas's workshop smells like wire and weather. He is a technician by trade, a man who hears electricity complaining and knows how to get it to behave without making it feel bullied. He had cleared a spot on the bench. Our father's watch lay on a rag like evidence. "You didn't change the battery," he said, lifting it gently. I couldn't. Felt like lying. And now he looked at me over the top of the watch, which is the thing our mother used to do when we were small and trying to pretend something had not happened in the exact room where she stood with the proof.
"Now I want to know what time looks like when it keeps going," I said. "And I want to know what we look like when we stop pretending we aren't brothers." It's ridiculous how many truths can be spoken with pliers and a screwdriver on a Wednesday afternoon. We worked without inventing a conversation designed to make us uncomfortable. He pried off the back, I held the tiny screws, because one of us had to be responsible for the parts that try to escape. We slid a new battery in and waited the way men wait for coffee to boil, as if our looking would make it faster. The second hand twitched, then started. We both exhaled. "Remember how he'd tap the glass when he was trying to leave someone's house without being rude?" Lucas said. "Remember how he'd say, 'Check the drain,' like we were living in a world where drains were the main problem?" I answered. He grinned, and it changed his whole face, from the fight I'd memorized to the boy who used to drop screws in my hair from the top of the ladder. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small velvet pouch, the kind that makes you feel like the thing inside is expensive, even if it's not. He tipped it into his palm. A ring. A different one. A man's ring. Plain. Thick. "He took it off at the hospital the week before," Lucas said, looking at anywhere but me. "I found it in the suit pocket after. I should have brought it to you. I didn't know how. I had this irrational thought that if I kept it, he'd be angry at me from wherever he was, and his ghost would at least have to come yell. It's not logical, I know." "I get it," I said, and I did. Grief doesn't need you to pass logic. It needs you to hold the wrench while it tries to loosen the wrong nut for a while. I took the ring. It had a tiny nick on the inside where work had told it a story. We set it on the bench next to the watch and looked like men who were trying not to cry for reasons that would embarrass us in a different room. Not this one. We went outside and checked the gutter, because that had been the reason he'd said yes, and it felt right to honor the lie we had both chosen to believe together. The downspout had a cluster of leaves in the elbow where water wanted to make an argument. He held the ladder, I cleared it with the hook. Water gushed in an impolite way and then settled into its better manners. We stood there like people who had done a chore and liked what the chore had done to their insides. "Coffee?" he asked. "Please," I said. He poured into the same cracked mug our father used to make a point about things that don't need to be replaced just because they are imperfect. At the table, we wrote our mother a 2-line note about Sunday. "We'll bring pastries that aren't the ones you pretend to like," Lucas wrote. Under it I wrote, "We'll check the drain." I slipped our father's ring into the pocket of my coat, and then changed my mind and set it on the little shelf in my mother's hallway where she keeps spare keys and a small cactus that somehow refuses to die. We didn't argue about who gets the ring, because this wasn't a competition. We agreed to keep it in the one place we both passed through. It felt like letting something live where it wanted, instead of where it had been kept. Spring doesn't ask permission. It just starts doing the work it's been planning silently for months. The snow on the grates melts into a run and then a memory. The city smells like something that might want to be clean again. On a Thursday, Found Night moved outside. The community center set up a table under a tree that remembers kids climbing it and old men sitting under it pretending to be disgusted by birds. People brought things. A woman held up a single key and cried when someone across the circle said, "That's my mailbox. I thought I'd never prove it was mine." Everyone clapped because clapping is what our hands do when our mouths can't.
Helena wore the ring on a thin chain around her neck. It sat right at the soft spot where throat meets the words you say out loud. She took a breath into the microphone and told a short story about a crooked picture and a faucet that lied, and a man who left the room before sorry had a place to sit. She didn't look at me, which made the whole thing easier to survive. After, she handed me a cookie wrapped in a napkin with violets printed on it and said, "Thank you for taking a thing out of the cold." I nodded, because sometimes words are heavy and you don't want to risk dropping them. Sundays became a habit again. Not the kind where you write it in your calendar and then fail it with a nap. The kind where you don't ask yourself whether you will, and your feet take you before your brain has time to argue. I'd show up at Lucas's place with something that needed fixing, or he'd show up at mine with the look of a man who has decided a light fixture has had enough of its own ideas. We never made a joke about it being therapy. We never called it anything at all. We let our hands speak. He'd say, "Check the drain," when I was about to say something that might have hurt us both if the pressure was wrong. I'd say, "Metal remembers the way home," when his jaw went tight the way it does when a memory shows up uninvited and puts its feet on the coffee table. My mother pretended not to watch from the kitchen doorway. We pretended not to notice we were being watched. The ring lived on the little shelf where I'd left it, gathering dust that proved placement beats possession. The watchmaker called. "It's ticking like it thinks it has somewhere to be," he said. I went to pick it up with Lucas. The man slid it across the counter with that reverence bosses used to have for responsibility. We both put our fingers on the glass at the same time and laughed because we are, after all, brothers, and our bodies remember how to share a thing. On a walk home from a job, fixing a broken hinge on a door that never liked winter, I turned down the block where the snow first learned my name. The drain looked like any other drain. That's the thing about moments. They don't leave markers for strangers. Only you know which sidewalk holds your version of surrender and which bench remembers your hand. I nudged the edge of the grated frame with my boot, a little nod to my father, a man who would be unbearable if he could hear the way his phrase now solves arguments. My phone buzzed, a text from Lucas. No preamble, no performance. It said, "Lunch on Sunday?" I typed yes and added a picture of the drain for no reason he'd understand without having to ask. Some nights, the sentence that woke me that first night shows up again, like a polite ghost asking if we still need to talk. He didn't get to say sorry. It doesn't make me pull my covers over my face anymore. It makes me reach for my phone. "Check the drain?" I text. "Always," he writes back. I keep the hook on a nail in my kitchen now, not in the backpack. It doesn't need to travel with me to remember its job. I know where it is when the world asks for the kind of help that isn't on a list. When something catches where it shouldn't, I take it down. Sometimes it's a ring in the cold. Sometimes it's 2 words in a throat that forgot how to deliver them. Sometimes it's a call. We never got an apology from our father. We never gave him one. We figured out a way to say what we needed to say to each other anyway. That is the gift the ring gave me, a permission slip to do something with the missing, instead of waiting for it to fill itself. If this story brought back a sentence you owe someone, or one you're waiting to hear, tell me where you're watching from and what you plan to do with it. Share your moment below, and follow the channel for more true-at-heart stories about small things pulled back from cold places. I'll be here, tapping the glass, checking the drain, saying the word first.